Greetings and welcome to episode 30 of the Sustaining the Herd podcast, brought to you by Agri-Services and Engineering of Raymond, Nebraska. I'm Andrew Wadle, and I'm joined in the studio with my co-host, Brock Vitek.
Hey there, Andrew.
Morning, Brock. And we're also joined by our special guest today, Doug Stanton of IMI Global, which is a division of Where Food Comes From. And this is going to be really interesting because that's, I think, a good teaser as far as where food comes from. We're going to be talking about that with Doug in a moment. And before we talk to Doug and let Doug introduce himself, just a reminder about what Sustaining the Herd is all about. And our returning listeners know about what we talk about, and that is everything sustainability related to animal agriculture. And for our new guests, well, what is sustainability to Agri-Services? Well, it's, of course, there's a million different definitions of sustainability, but we kind of boil it down to three pretty distinct areas. One is sustainability and just preserving and protecting our air and water, and that is keeping contaminants out of our air and water. We all want clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. The second is sustainability as it relates to efficiency, and that is doing more with less, utilizing all of our resources to the best we can. And lastly is sustainability is business sustainability. You know, our businesses all need to be financially sustainable and strong so that they continue to do what they do, and and the American farmers continue to do what they do better than anybody else in the world. Yes, we're biased. And that is produce food and fiber safely, efficiently, humanely, etc. So with that, welcome, Doug.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. You bet. I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Doug Stanton. As they've said, I'm with IMI Global, a division of Where Food Comes From. We are based here in Castle Rock, Colorado. My role is sales and business development. I've been with the company in some aspect of it, basically since the beginning, about 20 years now, and been in different roles, from boots on the ground, conducting our verifications at the ranches, backgrounders, feed yards, been at the packing plants, done a little bit of everything of it. And now my role is looking at new opportunities and business development. So I appreciate the opportunity to be on and tell a little bit about our company.
Awesome. Well, thanks for introducing yourself, Doug. And before I jump into my first question, I'd just like to look back for a moment for all of our listeners. Doug and I first met last September 2024 when Doug was actually a speaker at the Red Angus Convention, which was held here in Lincoln. Since it was in town, I decided to go check it out because I recognized a couple names on the program. And Doug, I think, were you the lunch keynote? Was that correct?
Yeah, that was on lunch deal. Yeah.
Yeah, so after a nice beef lunch, as always, that we'd have at the Red Angus Convention, I caught Doug in the hallway at the conference center after that and said, "Hey, we have a podcast. I really enjoyed your talk today. I think you'd be a great guest." So fast forward here to June 2025, and Doug's on the podcast. So great to have that come full circle and have you with us today.
You bet.
My first question, Doug, is, I just like to go back to what Andrew said about how we view sustainability here at Agri-Services. It's a few things. It's the environment, clean air and water. It's resource efficiency, not only doing more with less in terms of physical resources, but also our other resources like our labor force and treating our animals well. And it's profitable, sustainable businesses. Mm-hmm. And the reason I bring that up again is because I think you and your team at IMI Global and Where Food Comes From hit on all of those things every day in your work and really empower producers to make those things sustainable. So just wondering, could you give us and our listeners a glimpse into what exactly it is you all do?
You bet. Well, kind of an easy way to summarize what we do is third-party verification of different attributes. And I focus primarily, in the IMI division, focuses primarily on the beef industry. But the company itself, when we look at, as you mentioned, it's a division of Where Food Comes From, and we're involved in dairy, pork, poultry. We also get involved in organic certification. So that gets us involved in crops and fruits, vegetables, and wineries. We deal some with sustainability as far as the wine industry, the Almond Growers Association. We have a good working relationship with them around sustainability. When you look at the beef side of things, one of our verification programs is called CARE, which stands for a Community of Agriculturists that Respect the Earth. And that is our sustainability platform. We developed it in January of 2020 after we had submitted it to the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. They said it met their framework for sustainability in the U.S. for the beef industry. And so at that point, we launched the program. In 2024, the program's grown to the point we certified around 1.1 million head in 24, representing roughly 30 million acres of sustainable crop grazing and cropland. That's kind of our story in a nutshell of what we focus on, at least on the sustainability subject. Another part of what you saw, Brock, at that presentation was we looked at other verification programs like source and age verification, verifying that cattle are under 30 months of age. Actually, our business started as far as verification after the BSE Cal of 2003, where we lost access to the export market going to Japan, a very valuable market for us. And so the only way to get back into that market at that time was verifying that the cattle were under 20 months of age. And it had to be along with a USDA program called a process verified program in order to do that. And we were the first company in the U.S. to do that, and worked with a feed yard in Southwest Kansas, was the first feed yard that was approved for Japanese export. And that's where we really started our verification business. The company overall started we're right at our 30th year anniversary this year, started in 95 with John Saunders, and he primarily was focusing on traceability, putting EID tags in cattle. Long before that, what I always like to refer to is long before EIDs were cool, where traceability was cool. It was ahead of its time, really, and developing a database to store those records. That's kind of where he got started. Then as we needed verification for the Japanese market, then that just rolled perfectly into what he was already doing as far as traceability, applying EID tags, and building a database to support that information. So since then, we then added the NHTC program, which stands for the Non-Hormone Treated Cattle Program, which is an export program also to the European Union. And so primarily we're focusing on no hormones there. And in the cow-calf operations, that's primarily just not implanting. And then we build on that, what we refer to as bundling. And then a lot of producers will then add our verified natural beef program to that, which is no antibiotics, no hormones, and no animal byproducts can be fed. So very often you'll see probably the video sales is where most of our customers market their cattle because it is, somewhat of a niche market, and you've got to find your buyers. And the video companies provide a great platform for buyers to be able to find program cattle that are involved in different verification programs, because in a lot of cases, Brock and Andrew, feed yards have contracts well in advance with packers of delivery of program cattle. So if that was NHTC or if that was natural, a lot of times they'll have contracts out 6, 9, 12 months out. Not necessarily on a particular pen of cattle, but what packers like to do on these specialty programs is get so locked in on headcount so that their sales staff can then go out and market the product and get that done ahead of time and know where they're going. And so a lot of times these guys are, committed to 1,000 head a month or whatever of those particular cattle. So they are going to the video companies to find those cattle, to get the numbers they need and be assured that they are verified, because we work closely with the video companies to make sure that those cattle are approved before they go into that sale. And we do a cross check with them so that there's no problem between buyer, seller, the video company, our company, everybody's on the same page. And we know that it's not just questionable, and there's no question if they're approved or not.
Sure.
And so that's fascinating. So so when it comes to verification, it seems as though there's two paths. I mean, there can be verification on the organic side, or what I'd call more like a mandated certification, and then you can also have, if you are a feedlot, a dairy, whatever, you could have your own internal practices as well that you can verify that as a third. So in other words, saying I've got these SOPs to properly care for my cattle, but I'm going to bring in, say, IMI Global to verify my SOPs. Does that happen also?
Yes, that happens also. And good point, Andrew, that these are voluntary marketing programs. There is no mandatory, because we're working with AMS, with Ag Marketing Service of USDA. That's the voluntary side. FSIS is the regulatory side of USDA. So we don't work so much on that. That really is from the plant forward when you get into food safety and those type of things. So we're really focusing on bringing the cattle to the plant to meet those different programs, but it's a voluntary program. And then what you're referring to is where the third party, what we do is if they have a particular program they're looking at, whether that's maybe it's a grass-fed program, they're specific for their supply chain, or it's a natural program, or something that they've developed their own SOPs for their own, and they've then even gone forward with that and taken that, and they've got some kind of a branded product that they've got labeled with FSIS with USDA, and then they'd like to have that verified third party. And that's where we come into play, provide that assurance to the brand of that this is, a third party behind it, and it's not just somebody signing a piece of paper.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that the company got started back with the cow that stole Christmas, right?
Yeah.
In 2003, and all the way up to sustainability claims today. That's a really neat story there. And I love how you shared, how the company's evolved over time to really kind of meet the demands of the changing marketplace.
As things come up, you bet. Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to ask a question related to that, Doug. My first question, and then I'll have maybe a follow-up here. First, I'd just like to ask, who is your customer in the marketplace?
In the marketplace, it varies a little bit, but it goes all dimensions of the beef industry. Ranchers are probably our number one customer. That's our largest customer group, our ranch operations. Those that are looking to add value to their cattle as they market them, whether that's a video sale, where they do it as calves being weaned in the fall, or carry them over as yearlings and sell them, carry them over the winter and then try to sell them, or even take them back to grass and then sell them after the grazing season the following year. So that's probably our number one customer. But since most of these programs require the whole supply chain to be approved for the attribute that you're verifying. So if it's natural, not only can the ranch be approved, but any place they go up the chain has to also be approved in order to keep the attribute in place and keep them qualified. So we also work with backgrounding operations. Some of them are grazing, wheat pasture, dry lot. We also work then with feed yards. And then we focus on making sure that the paperwork is all good before they ship to the plant, because the plant has contracted the cattle, right? For this particular program, for natural, NHTC, whatever it is. And they expect those cattle to be approved for that. And so our job is to help our customers make sure that everything is lined up, everything's in place. All the T's are crossed and I's dotted, and everything's good to go. So then when they get to the packing plant, they can get paid that whatever premium is designated to that. And then that packer can take it on and put it in his branded program, whether that's a natural program or shipping to the European Union, or some other in-house brand that he is working with. So work clear through to the packers and work a lot with them too, from that standpoint. So it's really the whole supply chain, from ranch to the brands.
Yeah, and my reason for asking was, please correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but from what I think what Andrew and I are able to see in the marketplace, a lot of sustainability initiatives seem to be, consumer driven, or at least the market signals are sent by consumers or maybe investors in some of the food companies, and those signals make their way back to the production side of the supply chain. So I was just wondering, who are you working with and working for? And it sounds like everyone along the way for the most part, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, especially on sustainability. A lot of these companies went out there and made those statements to their investors and the stockholders and saying, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050 or whatever that date is out there. Most of them having no idea how to get there. It sounded good, and their competitors have done it, so they've got to do it. And everybody's trying to one up each other right now, it seems like. But I don't think a lot of companies have a real good plan exactly how they're going to get there. But you're right. It is being driven by those companies coming back from that side of it. A good example is we have a large distributor market that is out there, and they came back and they said that based on COVID and some of those kind of things, they wanted to make sure that their supply chain was secure. And they did not want to run out of product. And they said, we cannot have our meat shelves empty. So whatever we can do to help, we know we can't guarantee that, but anything we can do to get there. And so one of the things we haven't talked about yet is we are working primarily with feed yards, but also all the way down the supply chain, going back from there, is secure beef supply plans. We are helping feed yards develop those plans in mainly the Midwest states. And so that if we did have an outbreak of foot and mouth or some other disease that would limit movement of cattle, that they would have a plan in place at their feed yard or their background operation where they could still move cattle, where they've had some with the state, particular state health officials, and wherever they're based, wherever their operation is at. So that was in my mind, a great example where a retailer pushed back and said, we need to make sure that our supply chain is secure. And since then, we've had other supply chains also look at that and say, we want to whatever we can do with a secure beef supply, and we put those plans in place anywhere all along our supply chain, so that we can at least be in front of be at top of the list when something does happen, and we have a plan in place. The state knows we do, and we can be one of the first to move cattle in that particular case. So it's insurance, basically. It's one of those deals. It's like crop insurance. You buy it and hope you never have to use it, but if you do, it's in place. And that's another thing that we are working at right now, kind of hand in hand with sustainability in some ways, from that side of it, but definitely from the traceability side of things.
Yeah, surely what you guys are doing literally cuts up and down the supply chain. When you start talking about the packers, and you talk about the retailers, and you talk about the producers, and then you talk about the people in town, our friends, the people in town who are buying the product, this is really going up and down that chain, it kind of to scratch everybody's itch, so to speak.
You bet.
So let's just say we have, Andrew and Brock's feed yard, and that has a nice ring to it, doesn't it, Brock?
Yeah, we better do that one of these days.
We could even call Brock and Andrews. I'd be totally fine with that. Let's just say we were to contact IMI Global and say, hey, listen, we want to participate in NHTC or CARE. What happens after you mobilize and come to our feed yard? What would your team do?
Okay.
Take us through the process.
Yes, let's go through the process.
You bet. The first part we would start with the application process and find out more about your operation via that application. We would then send you a contract that would outline the costs, depending on what program you're involved in, what stage of production you are. And then we would send you, an account manager would be assigned to you at that point, once we have those two things in place. And then they would help walk you through what the next steps, and that would be to have the on-site evaluation. So someone would, in the area, we try to keep our verifiers as close proximity to our customer base as we can. And they would then, you'd be assigned a verifier by the account manager. They would then come on site, and we would, the account manager would give you an outline, a little bit of what we're looking for when we come on site. And that would be depending on the scope of the program. So if it was an NHTC program or a natural program, then we would be looking at in a feed yard setting, we'd be looking at the rations that are being fed. Are there antibiotics there? Are there hormones there? Are there any animal byproducts coming in with a commercial feed product potentially? We would focus on that. We would look at traceability in that feed yard when those cattle arrive and to the point they ship. What is your system? Different feed yards have different programs that they utilize, but we have to maintain traceability. Those cattle, if you're a feed yard and you're involved in one of these programs, the cattle would have to have been approved before they got to you, first of all. So they would come in with some paperwork from documentation standpoint of what they're approved for. They'd have a manifest and they would have EID tags. And one of your responsibilities would be to read those EID tags on arrival of those cattle, then go into our beef passport database and verify that those cattle that you received, not just the paperwork, but the individual cattle you received are actually approved for the claims that the paperwork says they are. So
to even enter into the program.
Yep, as you enter in. That's right. And then that's all in place. And then as a feed yard, then when you're ready to ship to the packer, then you would go into our beef passport system and you would go through what we call our shipping process. And you would say, I'm going to this particular packer with this group of cattle. And here's the documentation. Here's what I've got. We would already have those tags in our system because you would have entered those when you read them initially and entered them in and started the process on what we call the right to ship process. And then when we get right prior to the packer in the last week or two prior to harvest, then we do the final documentation and you go to with documentation to the plant with the approval.
And then so getting right up to the harvest part. So will you have someone at the feedlot as cattle are being loaded out to make sure that they're being handled up good standards and whatnot?
Yeah, no, we don't do that. It would take a lot of manpower to do that with the customer base to be there every time someone is shipping. But what we do is we have an initial verification to make sure you understand the program. And if it's care, for instance, where there is animal handling, we will look at look at the operation itself, look at your practices. We will watch cattle be managed and be work group of cattle and just see how your processing crew is working. And we'll also look at, as far as the facilities themselves, make sure there's no way for cattle to get injured and what the process looks like. Then we'll come back on an annual basis and review your SOPs and look what you're doing in the process, see if there's any changes. And another big part of it is we do training with the operation while we're there. And then we also want you to do additional training of your employees and keep that up on an annual basis so that they all are aware of what the program is about, especially in regards to what their day-to-day would be involved in regards to the programs. And that training is also a big part of it.
Is there any requirement, Doug, for BQA or TQA?
With our care program, we would like all participants on the operation to be BQA certified. It's easy to do anymore. It's provided online, no cost. You can get certified, and it's good for 3 years. So we really would like to have all participants in that setting, at least they're going to be involved with that process and anything to do with the cattle themselves as far as handling that they are approved. Yes, that's a big part of our animal care section of the care program.
And what is BQA, just for our non-ag listeners?
Beef quality assurance is what we're referring to. And you can do it online now and very easily. Some people, some feed yards will provide it for their employees on site, have maybe their consulting vet provided, or maybe some pharmaceutical company could be doing it, the training, and they get all their employees trained once a year. That's some practices that we see. But you can also do it online or attend classes. I know a lot of times with different state annual conventions, they'll provide a section where producers can go and get BQA certified. If they, especially if they want to do it in person, and maybe you're more hands-on that way versus going online to do it. But there's many ways to get it done. And I think it's essential. And it's a key part of our care program from the animal handling side of things.
Interesting. So, if we really kind of fast forward to kind of where we are now, or even look out to what we see in Europe, because people always talk about how things in Europe are kind of like the precursor to what we have here. And so, you perhaps you've seen it, Doug, where, you can go to, it's like in Ireland, and you go to the meat counter, and, you can scan the barcode with your smartphone, and it says, hey, this ground beef came from Brock and Andrew's feed yard. And there's a picture of Andrew and Brock, right. And our kids and the dogs and all this stuff. Looking ahead, in your crystal ball, is that going to come here? And if so, how far off do you think it would be?
Yeah, I think definitely. And you could do that a little bit on some of the small branded products, that are out there now. You could get into that, where at least it takes you to a website, right? There's a QR code on the package, and then takes you to a website of at least a group of operations that this could have came from, a particular supply chain that this would have came from. Now, what you're referring to is what, is called story beef, basically, I think it's coming. It'll come. It's going to be challenging on a large scale basis, I think. But we're doing a lot of things with DNA anymore, taking DNA samples of carcasses and finding the origin of that animal. And then the cost is part of it too, of the doing that from that side of it. But as we get more sophisticated in our technology, and and how anything with technology, the more it's out there, the costs start coming down. Then I think we'll get to that point at some point. I don't know if it'll be at all the large retailers that you see, or you'd be mostly at the niche markets, or buying it over the internet. You definitely get the stories there. And there's a lot of that anymore. We have a lot of our customers that do what direct to consumer. They may market their cattle through a video sale, a big portion of them, but then maybe 10 or 20 head a year, they market through a direct to consumer market, where they can tell their story about their operation, have a website, have a QR code maybe on the product that someone can scan and then get back to their operation specifically. And we can do that in those kind of product lines, on those brands. But on the generic commodity cattle, that's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. But, as traceability becomes more and more common and clear through our system, then those opportunities will present themselves for sure.
So I guess I'd look at it as, we don't necessarily have a lot of story beef, but we've got a great beef story. and what I
like that.
And I always talk, and I think a lot about the people in town. And I think, and even as someone, as not the person in town, although I am in town, but someone in the industry, it's really great for people to know it's not about cattle arrive, fattened cattle go on the truck, and they get processed into what we eat. There's a lot more to it, and it's really conscientious, well planned out, well thought out, with the people in town being top of mind. Really, I mean, they're doing it.
And I think our care program comes as close as to story beef today already, in that the consumer can be assured that if that label is on that product and is our heart logo, our care certification, that went all the way back to the ranch of origin. And we made sure that the ranch where those cattle were raised, where they were born, raised, weaned, shipped from, is following all of our requirements in regards to animal welfare, environmental stewardship, and then people and community involvement and the operation, worker safety, those kind of things. They can be assured that not only was that just in the final product there at the feed yard or even the backgrounding operation, that it started all the way back from when those cattle were born. And from that point forward, those cattle were raised according to those guidelines and to the requirements of that program. And so they can be assured that that label is carrying those attributes and that certification. So it's a kind of their stamp of approval that they know that was raised on, that's a sustainable product, not just in name, but also all the way back to the operation that the cattle were raised on. We're all part of that supply of it and in that product that they're now bringing into their home and feeding to their family.
Doug, I might call you and your colleagues, some of the unsung heroes of the ag industry. That's a phrase we use here on Sustaining the Herd sometimes, because first of all, you all are helping producers to make sure they have a good, positive story to tell and make sure and verify that they're doing the right things. You're not only doing that, you're also helping them to tell that story to the consumer. And I think that is so important for the ag industry to, one, make sure we're doing the right thing, but two, to make sure we're properly communicating that so that consumers can have trust and confidence in the food they're purchasing and ultimately eating and feeding their families with. So that's just awesome.
Yeah.
And we also do, you go to our website and look, and we do some story bits, what we call story bits. And that gets back a little bit, Andrew, to your story beef thing, where we went to particular operations with a film crew, interviewed the family, looked at the operation, looked at the cattle, and be able to tell that story from that operation. That's just part of our bigger group of producers that we work with that, and they can be assured that these, this wasn't raised in a factory, as Andrew, as you mentioned, that these are people. And these are people that care. It's their livelihood. They're going to do everything they can to produce the best quality beef they can while they're on their operation. And I think those story bits have been very popular with the consumer and people that's come to our website. So that's another step, Brock, that we are taking to help tell that story. And because that's really what our job is, I think, is to help tell the story to the rancher. They don't have ways of getting to the consumer, and that's our role, to help provide that connection. That's
great. Well, Doug, I just want to say a big, hearty thank you for your time today. I know Andrew and I have really appreciated the conversation, and I'm confident that all of our listeners have enjoyed this as well. So thanks again for sharing some time with us.
Yeah, and Doug, and I always look at agriculture as a group of people that are operating quietly in the background, satisfying society. And I'm glad you're there. You're there right with us and the cattle feeders and everybody basically working in the background to feed America and the world.
You bet. We take that role very seriously, and that's what we do. We've been doing it for 30 years and hoping to do it for 30 more.
Right on.
And on that note, to all of our listeners out there, whether you're a producer or even a consumer, maybe you're someone from town, I just want you to really listen to what Doug just said right there, that they take this job seriously and they're out there making sure helping producers are doing the right thing and so that you have safe, healthy food to eat. The agriculture industry is working hard to feed the world every day, and we just want everyone to know that. And finally, Doug, we do have a lot of producers who listen to our Sustaining the Herd podcast. If they have been intrigued by anything they heard today, what might be the best way to get a hold of you or your colleagues?
Yeah, probably go to our Where Food Comes From, or then go to the IMI Global website. We have both of them independently, but go there or go to or call our office here in Castle Rock, 303-895-3002, and give us a call, and you'll get a live person, I assure you, and then we can take it from there based on what part of the country you're in. I might work with you, or one of my other coworkers could get you started, and at least answer your questions about what you might be looking at from that side of it and what your interest is. And we get a variety of things from consumers wanting to know about what's going on, how the beef's being raised, and we're there to help tell that story and work with the ranchers and everybody that are supplying it.
Perfect. Well, with that, I think we'll call it an episode. I want to say thanks again to you and to all of our returning listeners. Thanks again for choosing to come back. And for all of our new listeners, we're glad that you are here with us today. Until next time, thanks for joining the herd today.